Today, we are diving into Chapter 2, Introduction to Enterprise Assets Protection, the foundation that every security professional needs to master. So let's get started. Let me start with a fundamental question. What does it really mean to protect an organization's assets? In today's world, protecting an organization's assets is far more complex than ever before. We live in a rapidly changing environment shaped by globalization, instant communication, and constant technological advancement. These factors, combined with complex threats and evolving regulations, make the job of security professionals incredibly challenging yet incredibly important. But here's what's truly essential. Today's security professional cannot simply implement a checklist of rules. Instead, they must think strategically. They need to be adaptable thinkers who understand business operations inside and out. They must be skilled in process management, understanding how systems work and where vulnerabilities might exist. They need to be knowledgeable about business operations, so they can align security measures with organizational goals. And importantly, they must be able to act quickly and accurately when threats emerge. Think of a security professional as a strategic business partner, not just someone who watches cameras and controls access points. They are problem solvers who help their organizations navigate an increasingly complex threat landscape while maintaining operational efficiency. This is the mindset we need to understand as we explore asset protection in the 21st century. Now, let's get specific. What exactly is assets protection in a business context? In the security world, assets protection extends far beyond just protecting money or financial resources. It encompasses a comprehensive, holistic view of everything your organization values and depends on. Traditionally, security professionals have focused on protecting three main categories of assets: people, your employees, customers, and anyone within your organization. Property, physical facilities, equipment, inventory, and infrastructure. Information, data, trade secrets, customer records, and intellectual property. But modern assets protection thinking goes even deeper. We now understand that organizations have intangible assets that are just as valuable, sometimes even more valuable than physical ones. These include your reputation, the relationships you've built with customers and partners, and your creditworthiness in the market. Here's the key concept. Security should never be seen as merely a cost center or a compliance box to check. Instead, security is a value-adding element of the organization. How? By using a strategic mix of physical measures, locks, barriers, surveillance, procedural measures, policies, access controls, vetting processes, electronic measures, technology systems, intrusion detection, cyber defenses. Together, these work to mitigate both natural hazards like fire, flooding, or earthquakes and man-made threats like theft, sabotage, or cyber attacks. This holistic approach represents a fundamental shift in how we think about security in modern enterprises. And that's what we'll be exploring throughout this chapter. Welcome to the world of comprehensive assets protection. Let me expand on this crucial concept because it directly impacts how we approach security in organizations. Under Enterprise Security Risk Management, or ESRM, there's been a fundamental philosophical shift. Previously, security professionals would design programs and implement them top-down. Today, that approach has evolved significantly. Now, the focus is on guiding asset owners, the people who actually own and control organizational resources, through the decision-making process. Here's the key distinction. Asset owners are ultimately responsible for the risks they choose to accept or mitigate. Security professionals don't dictate decisions. Instead, they advise, inform, and guide. What's the security professional's role in this new framework? It's threefold. First, identify risks, thoroughly assess what could go wrong. Second, prioritize them, determine which risks pose the greatest threat to organizational objectives. Third, establish mitigation methods, recommend specific strategies to address those risks. But here's what's important. The security professional makes recommendations, but the asset owner makes the final decision. This is a partnership model, not a command and control model. This shift reflects a fundamental maturity in how we think about security. It's not separate from business operations, it's integrated with them. Security professionals are now strategic advisors, who help organizations make informed choices about protecting what matters most to them. Now, this brings us to a critical question. What exactly are your organization's assets? You'd think the answer would be obvious, but here's the reality. Many asset owners lack a thorough understanding of their actual assets. They might know about their facilities and equipment, but they overlook intangible assets that could be equally or more valuable. That's why we need to think systematically about assets in two categories. Tangible assets first. These are the physical resources you can see, touch, and directly measure. Think about your organization right now. What can you physically interact with? People and workforce, your employees and their skills. Land, real estate, and facilities, the buildings and grounds where operations occur. Infrastructure and buildings, the systems that support operations. Equipment, tools, and machinery, devices used in production and service delivery. Inventory and raw materials, stock and supplies on hand. Vehicles and products, transportation and what you produce or sell. Cash and accounts receivable, financial resources. Customer data and contracts, documented relationships and agreements. Telecommunication systems, networks and communication infrastructure. Financial investments, securities and capital reserves. These are all things you can touch, count, and put a price tag on. Intangible assets now. Here's where many organizations fall short. These are non-physical resources that are often worth far more than tangible assets, yet they are frequently overlooked. Consider these. Intellectual property and knowledge, patents, formulas, proprietary methods, proprietary processes, how you do things better than competitors. IT capabilities, your technological infrastructure and expertise. Credit rating and financial stability, your reputation in financial markets. Continuity, posture and resiliency, your ability to recover from disruptions. Reputation, image, and brand, how customers and the public perceive you. Goodwill, trust, and relationships, connections with customers, partners, and the community. Expertise and human capital, the experience and skills of your people. Workforce morale and retention, employee satisfaction and loyalty. Vendor diversity and longevity, your supply chain relationships and stability. Think about it this way. If your company lost its reputation tomorrow, through a scandal or data breach, how much would that cost? Probably more than losing some equipment. If your talented employees left because of poor management, how much would that impact your operations? Probably significantly. This is why comprehensive asset identification is the foundation of effective asset protection. You cannot protect what you don't recognize as valuable. Organizations that succeed in today's environment are those that understand both their tangible and intangible assets, and they protect them accordingly. This holistic perspective, recognizing that assets extend far beyond physical resources, is what separates modern asset protection from outdated security thinking. Let's now consolidate everything we've learned by taking a detailed look at the comprehensive asset categories that security professionals must protect. I'm going to organize this into two clear columns, tangible and intangible, so you can visualize exactly what we are talking about when we say comprehensive asset protection. Tangible assets, physical resources you can measure. Starting with people and workforce. This is your most valuable tangible asset. Without skilled, dedicated employees, nothing else matters. Land, real estate and facilities, your physical locations where business happens. This could be corporate headquarters, manufacturing plants, warehouse, or retail stores. Infrastructure and buildings, the systems that support operations. Electrical systems, HVAC, water systems, structural integrity. Equipment, tools, and machinery, production equipment, computers, specialized tools, vehicles used in operations. Inventory and raw materials. Everything you have in stock waiting for production or sale. Vehicles and products, transportation assets, and the finished goods you produce or distribute. Cash and accounts receivable, liquid financial resources, and money owed to you by customers. Customer data and contracts, documented agreements and customer information. Telecommunication systems, networks, servers, phone systems that enable communication. Financial investments, securities, bonds, or other capital reserves. Intangible assets, non-physical resources that define value. intellectual property and knowledge, patents, copyrights, trade secrets, proprietary knowledge, proprietary processes, the unique ways you do business that competitors don't know about, IT capabilities, your technological expertise and systems, credit rating and financial stability, how financial institutions and markets perceive your organization, continuity, posture and resiliency, your ability to bounce back from disruptions, reputation, image, and brand, how the world perceives your organization, priceless yet fragile, goodwill, trust, and relationships, connections with stakeholders built over years, expertise and human capital, the accumulated knowledge of your people, workforce morale and retention, employee satisfaction and loyalty, vendor diversity and longevity, stable, diversified supply chain relationships. Here's the critical insight. A complete asset protection program must address both categories with equal seriousness. Protecting just your physical assets while ignoring your reputation is incomplete. Equally, focusing only on information security while neglecting facility security leaves you vulnerable. This is why we call it comprehensive. Everything matters. Now, here's something that surprises many people entering the security field. Asset protection is not a standalone function. It's deeply integrated with many other organizational departments and disciplines. Think about your organization as an interconnected system. Asset protection is a broad, complex function that requires coordination across multiple areas. Let me show you what this looks like. Integrated functions. Asset protection incorporates and works closely with several related disciplines. Investigations. When something goes wrong, who investigates? Security works with investigations to determine causes and prevent recurrence. Risk management. Broader organizational risk management addresses financial risks, operational risks, and security risks. These must align. Safety. Workplace safety and physical security overlap significantly. A safe workplace is a secure workplace. Quality assurance. Protecting the integrity of products and processes is both a quality and security function. Compliance. Regulatory requirements often drive security decisions. Security must help organizations meet legal and regulatory obligations. Emergency management. How does your organization respond to crisis? Security is central to emergency preparedness and response. All of these work together in a coordinated framework. This is why ESRM, Enterprise Security Risk Management, matters. It ensures that security decisions are aligned with broader organizational goals and that asset owners understand their role in risk mitigation. Required skills. This complexity means that senior asset protection professionals need exceptional collaboration and coordination skills. You cannot succeed in asset protection by working in isolation. You must understand how your security decisions impact finance departments and budgets, operations and workflow, human resources and employee relations, legal and compliance functions, executive leadership and strategy. Additionally, you need thorough understanding of enterprise operations. You can't protect what you don't understand. Effective security professionals become experts not just in security, but in how their organization actually works. Modern countermeasures. Finally, let me emphasize this critical point. Today's asset protection programs must include people, process, and technology working together. Notice I didn't say technology is the answer. I said people, process, and technology. Here's why. People, your security team. Awareness among employees, human judgment and response. Process, policies, procedures, workflows, accountability systems. Technology, tools, systems, automation, surveillance, monitoring. If you focus only on technology, fancy cameras and access systems, but have poor processes and unmotivated people, security fails. If you have great policies but no enforcement or technology, security fails. If you have great people but no systems or procedures to guide them, security fails. The most effective asset protection programs integrate all three elements. This integrated approach, supported by departments across the organization, is what enables modern organizations to protect their assets effectively. To truly understand modern asset protection, we need to step back and ask, how did we get here? What shaped the security practices we use today? The answer lies in understanding the key historical influences that have fundamentally transformed how organizations think about protecting their assets. Let me walk you through a timeline that shows this evolution. The 1970s, computer security emerges as a separate discipline. In the 1970s, something significant happened. As society became increasingly dependent on computers and information systems, computer security emerged as its own separate discipline. Before this, security was mostly about physical protection, locks, guards, cameras. But suddenly, organizations realized that digital assets required entirely different protection strategies. This separation of computer security from traditional security was the beginning of the integrated approach we use today. 1993, the World Trade Center attack increases infrastructure security focus. Fast forward to 1993. The first World Trade Center bombing shocked the nation and made organizations realize something critical. Critical infrastructure, the systems we all depend on, could be targeted and disrupted. This attack made security professionals and government officials recognize that protecting infrastructure wasn't just a government concern. It was essential for all organizations managing critical systems. 1995, Oklahoma City bombing heightens critical infrastructure awareness. 2 years later, the Oklahoma City bombing reinforced and amplified this lesson. The destruction caused by that attack demonstrated just how vulnerable infrastructure could be to determined adversaries. Organizations across sectors began investing more seriously in critical infrastructure protection and asking hard questions about their vulnerabilities. 2001 11 September attacks transformed global assets protection. Then came 11 September 2001, the most transformative date in modern asset protection. The terrorist attacks that day didn't just change security. They revolutionized it globally. This wasn't a small attack or a localized incident. It fundamentally altered how every organization on Earth thought about security. The implications were enormous, and we'll talk more about this pivotal moment on the next slide. 2019 to 2020 global pandemic introduces new security challenges. Finally, the COVID-19 pandemic introduced entirely new security challenges. Suddenly, organizations had to protect assets in distributed environments. Remote work, supply chain disruptions, and new cyber threats emerged. The pandemic forced security professionals to rethink traditional approaches and adapt to a world that was fundamentally different. Here's what these timeline markers show us. Asset protection is not static. It evolves as threats evolve, as technology evolves, and as society changes. The security professional of today must be a student of history, understanding that tomorrow will bring new challenges we haven't yet imagined. That continuous evolution is what keeps this field relevant and important. Now, let's dig deeper into a concept that became increasingly important after the 1990s attacks: critical infrastructure protection. What exactly is critical infrastructure, and why does it matter? Recognition of critical infrastructure vulnerability to both natural disasters like earthquakes and floods, and man-made attacks became a major influence on how we approach asset protection today. Organizations began asking, what happens if my systems fail? What does society depend on that I help provide? In the United States, the government recognized this and defined 16 industry sectors as critical infrastructure. Here's what's crucial to understand. Most of this non-defense infrastructure is not owned or operated by government. It's owned and operated by private enterprises, companies like yours. This means that private companies bear significant responsibility for protecting assets that society depends on. Let me walk you through these 16 critical infrastructure sectors so you understand the scope. Manufacturing and chemical. This sector includes critical manufacturing facilities, chemical plants, and the defense industrial base. If chemical plants are compromised, if manufacturing stops, the ripple effects are enormous. Organizations in this sector manage hazardous materials and essential production capacity. Energy and utilities. Think about what happens if the power grid goes down, or if water treatment stops. This sector includes energy systems, oil, gas, electricity, dams, nuclear facilities, water and wastewater systems. These are literally life-sustaining services that millions depend on daily. Communications and IT. Our entire connected world depends on communications networks and information technology systems. Banks, hospitals, emergency services, everything relies on this infrastructure. A disruption here affects everything else. Essential services. This is the broadest category, including healthcare systems where lives are saved, emergency services that respond to crisis, food and agriculture systems that feed populations, and financial services that keep the economy functioning. Failure in any of these areas creates immediate human consequences. Here's the critical realization. If you work in any of these sectors, and many of you probably do, you are not just protecting your company's assets. You are protecting assets that society depends on. That's a significant responsibility. It's also why governments have become more involved in requiring security standards for critical infrastructure. It's why security professionals in these fields are increasingly important to national and economic security. This expanded understanding of asset protection, recognizing that it extends beyond individual organizations to societal resilience, represents a maturation of the entire security field. And it directly leads us to the transformative moment that changed everything. 11th September, 2001. Let me pause here and emphasize something that cannot be overstated. 11th September, 2001, represented the most significant turning point in assets protection worldwide. This wasn't a regional incident or a single organization's problem. This was a global moment that fundamentally changed how every organization on Earth thinks about security. Let me walk you through the 4 major transformations that resulted from that day. Enhanced security measures and changing public expectations. First, the attacks led to enhanced security measures everywhere. But what's equally important is how public expectations changed. Before 9/11, people often resented security measures, long lines at airports, ID checks, surveillance cameras. They viewed security as intrusive and annoying. After 9th November, that changed dramatically. The public became much more tolerant of security measures because they understood the alternative. The cost-benefit analysis shifted. People were willing to accept inconveniences if it meant protection. However, this created a new tension. The ongoing debate between privacy versus protection. How much surveillance is acceptable? Where do we draw the line? These questions that we are still debating today were born from 9/11. Organizations capitalized on this changed tolerance. Security budgets increased. Policies that had been rejected before were now approved. Technology investments that had seemed excessive suddenly became necessary. The cultural shift was profound. Improved information sharing. Second, 9/11 revealed a critical vulnerability. Information wasn't being shared effectively between security and law enforcement agencies. Different organizations had pieces of the puzzle, but nobody was connecting the dots. This lesson was clear and urgent. After 9th November, there was a major push for better communication within security and law enforcement communities. Intelligence agencies began sharing information more readily. Information barriers that had existed for decades began to break down. Why? Because the cost of not sharing information measured in lives lost was unacceptable. This led to enhanced crime-fighting capabilities. When security professionals could access information from law enforcement, and law enforcement could access information from private security, effectiveness improved dramatically. This collaborative approach continues today, and has become standard practice. Advanced technologies. Third, 9/11 accelerated technological adoption. Organizations realized that technology could do things humans couldn't: process massive amounts of data, recognize patterns, provide real-time alerts. Greater application of technology became the norm. Threat analysis using data analytics. Vulnerability assessment using sophisticated tools. Protective measures leveraging automation and artificial intelligence. Before 9/11, some of these technologies existed but were considered experimental or expensive. After 9th November, they became essential. The pace of technological advancement in security accelerated dramatically. Strategic protection and research emphasis. Finally, and importantly, 9/11 led to more widespread discussion of strategic protection concepts incorporating ESRM principles. Organizations stopped asking, how do we implement these security measures? And started asking, what are our actual risks? What should we prioritize? How do we align security with business objectives? Additionally, there was a new emphasis on research. Universities, think tanks, and security organizations began investing heavily in understanding threats, vulnerabilities, and effective countermeasures. The field became more evidence-based and strategic. Here's the bottom line. 11th September 2001 transformed security from a necessary expense that organizations tolerated into a strategic function that organizations actively invest in. It shifted security from being reactive to being proactive. It changed the conversation from, how do we respond to attacks, to, how do we prevent them? That transformation is still shaping the field today. Now that we understand the context and importance of asset protection, let's talk about something practical. How do we actually manage the risks we've identified? As a security professional, when you've identified a risk and recognized its importance, what do? There are fundamentally 4 approaches to managing risk. Organizations typically use these approaches individually, or more often, in combination. Let me walk you through each one, and then I'll explain how ESRM principles guide these decisions. Strategy 1. Eliminate. The first strategy is eliminate. Remove the risk entirely by avoiding the activity altogether. Let me give you a practical example. A store manager recognizes that a particular product is frequently stolen, high theft risk. One response? Simply don't stock that product. If it's not in the store, it can't be stolen. The theft risk for that product is eliminated. This sounds straightforward, right? But here's the reality. Elimination is often not practical or possible. If you're a bank, can you eliminate the risk of robbery by not having money? Obviously not. That's the entire business. If you're a hospital, can you eliminate the risk of medical emergencies by not treating patients? No. So elimination is useful in specific situations where avoiding an activity doesn't undermine core business operations. But for most risks in most organizations, you need other strategies. Strategy 2. Reduce. The second strategy is reduce, mitigate the effects of the risk through security strategies and protective measures. This is the most common security function. When you can't eliminate a risk, you work to reduce it. Using our store example, a store manager knows theft is a risk. You can't eliminate it, you need to sell products. So what do? Install multiple cash registers, so there are fewer opportunities for theft. Use time-lock safes, so even if someone steals the safe, they can't open it immediately. Invest in security technology like cameras and alarms. Increase staffing during high-risk periods. Each of these measures reduces, but doesn't eliminate, the theft risk. The store accepts that some theft might occur, but they've implemented measures to significantly minimize it. This is where most organizational security programs focus. You identify what you can't eliminate, and then you implement multiple layers of protection to reduce the risk to an acceptable level. Strategy 3. Transfer. The third strategy is transfer, shift the risk to another entity, typically through insurance. When you transfer risk, you are essentially saying, I acknowledge this risk exists. Rather than managing it myself, I'm going to pay someone else to manage it. That someone else is usually an insurance company. The store that we've been discussing, they might buy theft insurance. If a robbery occurs, the insurance company assumes financial responsibility for the loss. The risk doesn't disappear, it's transferred to the insurance company, which has specialized expertise and resources to manage that category of risk across many organizations. Insurance is the most common form of risk transfer, but it's not the only one. Companies sometimes transfer risks through contracts with vendors or partnerships, where another organization assumes responsibility. Strategy 4. Accept. The fourth and final strategy is accept. Acknowledge the risk as part of operations when the cost of mitigation outweighs potential losses. This might sound counterintuitive, but it's actually very practical. Here's the key insight. Not every risk is worth mitigating. Sometimes the cost of reducing a risk exceeds the potential loss from that risk occurring. Think about it this way. If there's a 1% chance of losing $1,000, the expected loss is $10. If it would cost you $500 to reduce that risk to a 0.1% chance, that's not a good investment. It makes more financial sense to accept the risk. This is a normal and necessary part of both everyday business and everyday life. We all accept risks constantly. When you drive to work, You accept the risk of an accident. You don't stay home to eliminate that risk, because the benefit of going to work outweighs the risk of an accident. Similarly, organizations consciously decide, we are aware of this risk. We've evaluated it. We've decided that accepting it is the best business decision. This requires discipline and documentation. You must track what risks you are accepting and ensure leadership understands and approves those decisions. Bringing it all together. Here's what's crucial. Under ESRM principles, security professionals recommend strategies, but asset owners make final decisions. Your job as a security professional is to identify the risk clearly, evaluate each of the 4 strategies, eliminate, reduce, transfer, accept, present recommendations with clear analysis of costs and benefits. Help asset owners understand the implications of each choice. Then the asset owner, whether that's a department manager, business unit leader, or executive, makes the final decision. This collaborative approach ensures that security decisions are aligned with business priorities, and that leadership remains accountable for the risks they choose to accept. This is the mature approach to asset protection, not imposing security measures top-down, but engaging asset owners in informed decision-making about the risks they manage.
We've covered a lot of ground in this chapter, from understanding what assets are, to recognizing why protection matters, to understanding the 4 risk management strategies. Now, let me bring it all together with one of the most important frameworks in asset protection, the 4DS. Here's the fundamental principle. Assets protection requires a comprehensive strategy, not piecemeal elements. You cannot protect organizational assets by implementing security measures haphazardly. Instead, you need a systematic approach that ensures multiple layers of defense work together to create an integrated protection system. The 4DS framework provides exactly that, a systematic approach to security implementation. Think of it as 4 layers of defense, each building on the previous one. Let me walk you through each D. First D, deter. First objective, prevent any type of attack through visible security presence and protective measures. Deter means to discourage someone from attempting an attack in the first place. How? Through visible security presence. When potential adversaries see guards, cameras, access control systems, and security signage, many will simply move on to easier targets. Think about it practically. A burglar scoping out buildings will likely skip the one with obvious security measures and target the one that appears unprotected. Deterrence works. The goal is to make your organization an unattractive target through visible protective measures that communicate this place is protected. Second D, deny. Second objective, block adversary access to assets through physical and procedural barriers. Deter stops many threats, but not all. Some adversaries will proceed despite visible security. That's where deny comes in. You implement physical barriers, fences, walls, locked doors, that physically prevent or significantly impede access to assets. But deny isn't just about physical barriers. Procedural barriers matter equally. Access control procedures, authentication requirements, authorization levels. These are procedural denials. Even if someone gets past the physical fence, they might not have the password to enter the building, or the ID badge to access certain areas, or the authorization codes to operate systems. The combination of physical and procedural barriers creates layers that deny adversaries access to what you're protecting. Third D, detect. Third objective, identify attacks using surveillance, intrusion detection, human observation, or management systems. Despite your best efforts to deter and deny, determined adversaries might still attempt attacks. When they do, you need to know about it immediately. Detection is your early warning system. How do you detect attacks? Surveillance systems. Cameras monitoring critical areas. Intrusion detection systems. Sensors and alarms on doors, windows, perimeter. Human observation. Trained security personnel watching for suspicious activity. Management systems. Monitoring applications and networks for unauthorized access or anomalies. Detection is critical because even if an attack isn't prevented, early detection allows you to respond quickly, minimize damage, and potentially apprehend perpetrators. A robbery detected within minutes is far more manageable than one discovered hours later. Fourth D, delay. Fourth objective, slow perpetrators using physical security and target hardening methods once attack is in progress. Here's the reality. Sometimes, despite deterrence, denial, and detection, an attack still happens. When an attack is actively in progress, what do? You delay the perpetrator. How? Through target hardening, making assets harder to access, steal, or damage. Examples include reinforced doors and windows that take time to breach, time-lock safes that cannot be opened immediately, compartmentalized systems so an attacker cannot access everything at once, protected data storage that takes time to extract. Every second of delay matters because it increases the likelihood that authorities will arrive, gives you time to respond, reduces the amount of damage an attacker can cause, increases the risk to the attacker of being caught. The delay might be just minutes, but those minutes can mean the difference between a thwarted attack and a successful one. Putting it all together, the comprehensive approach. Notice the diagram shows these 4Ds as interconnected circles, not separate boxes. That's intentional. They work together. Deter stops many attacks before they start. Deny stops others who don't heed deterrence. Detect catches those who get through denial. Delay provides time to respond to detected attacks. This is comprehensive protection. You're not relying on just one strategy. You're using multiple layers of defense in depth, so that if one layer fails, others are in place. This is what mature asset protection looks like. It's not about having the fanciest cameras or the strictest policies. It's about thoughtfully implementing multiple integrated measures that work together to protect what matters most to your organization. Closing and call to action. Congratulations! You've completed Chapter 2. Introduction to Enterprise Assets Protection from Module 1 of our Protection of Assets and Security Management series. We've covered incredible ground today. We explored what assets really are, both tangible and intangible. We understood how asset protection evolved through historical events. We learned the 4 ways to manage risk. We discovered the 4DS framework for comprehensive protection. This foundation is essential because everything we'll learn going forward, investigation techniques, security technology, physical security, cyber protection, all builds on these fundamental concepts. But this is just the beginning. In Chapter 3, we're going to dive deeper into specific asset protection challenges, implementation strategies, and real-world case studies that show how these principles play out in practice. Before you leave, I have 3 quick requests. First, if you found this content valuable, please like this video. Your likes help us understand what resonates with you and help us reach more students who want to understand security and asset protection. Second, please subscribe to Simplify for Me. By subscribing, you'll get notifications whenever we release new chapters, new modules, and new content on finance, stock market analysis, and government policies, all explained clearly and accessibly. Third, check back soon for Chapter 3, where we'll explore security governance, organizational structures, and how companies actually implement these asset protection strategies. Thank you for joining me. If you have questions or topics you'd like us to cover, drop them in the comments below. And remember, understanding asset protection isn't just for security professionals. It's knowledge that makes you a better business decision maker, a more informed citizen, and someone who understands how the world really works. Until next time, keep simplifying, keep learning, and I'll see you in Chapter 3.